The year is 1955. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., just a young, recently ordained Baptist minister with a PhD in systematic theology, was suddenly thrust into the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott. Now think about that. He was only 26 years old, new in town, and honestly probably more comfortable in a library than on a national stage. This was not a job he went looking for. It was a responsibility that found him. And in that fire, that crucible of crisis, something absolutely incredible began to take shape. You know, we often see Dr. King as this monument, right? A powerful speaker, a dreamer. But that view, well, it kind of misses the architect behind the icon. It misses the brilliant strategist who built a systematic formula to take on an unjust world, a formula we're calling the MLK Equation. So today, we're going to deconstruct that equation to really understand how one person, armed with a powerful philosophy and just an unwavering discipline, could literally change the world. So let's start at the beginning. Our story doesn't begin with some grand plan for a revolution, but with a completely unexpected call to action. To really get the MLK equation, you have to understand the man before he became the movement, a scholar who was suddenly tasked with leading a fight for the soul of a city and, as it turns out, a nation. Just try to imagine the scene in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks makes her courageous stand, and the Black community is fired up, but they're leaderless. They needed a voice. Someone who could articulate their dignity, their demands, and who did they turn to? The new pastor in town, this young guy known for his intellect. But here's the thing, he was reluctant. I mean, he had a young family, a new church, but history, as it often does, had other plans. In that single moment of accepting leadership, the quiet theologian began this incredible transformation, forced to take all his deep philosophical knowledge and apply it to a real-world, high-stakes battle for justice. And it's right here that Dr. King has this pivotal realization. He completely understood what the opposition expected. They expected a fight on their terms, with anger, with aggression, with physical force. They were ready for that. But he saw another way. He realized the greatest power the movement had wasn't in matching their force, but in systematically inverting the oppressor's strategy. It was a radical idea. What if the response to hate wasn't more hate, but a disciplined, strategic, and unshakable moral power that the other side simply had no answer for? Now, this wasn't just some hopeful, nice idea. It was a deep philosophical commitment. This was the true beginning of the MLK equation. And it's built on two incredibly powerful concepts. First, you have agape, which is a Greek term for a selfless, unconditional love for everybody, even your enemies. Think of that as the moral shield. The second is satyagraha, a concept from Mahatma Gandhi, which basically means truth force. And that was the sword. By combining agape's love with satyagraha's truth, Dr. King figured they could replace the physical force of the state with the moral force of their cause, turning their own bodies into symbols that would expose the system's brutality for the whole world to see. So you might be wondering, where did this incredible strategic insight even come from? Well, it wasn't born overnight. It was forged over years of deep study, personal struggle, and just pure intellectual rigor, long before the world even knew his name. To really understand Dr. King the strategist, you first have to understand Dr. King the scholar. I mean, he saw the brutal, soul-crushing violence of segregation firsthand. It would have been so easy, completely logical even, to fall into despair, to just conclude that violence was the only language the system understood. But instead of giving in to that cynicism, he channeled all of that anguish into study. He committed himself to finding a real philosophical and practical answer to what seemed like an impossible problem. How do you defeat hate without becoming hateful yourself? So he went to the books and he synthesized the wisdom of giants. From Mahatma Gandhi, he took this powerful engine of nonviolent resistance. From Henry David Thoreau, he adopted the framework of civil disobedience, this idea that you have a moral duty to refuse to cooperate with an unjust law. And he grounded all of it in the deep moral framework of his own Christian theology, with its focus on love, redemption, and justice. This was his method, not just borrowing these ideas, but weaving them together into something totally new, something powerful, and something that was uniquely American.
And this is absolutely key. This wasn't just an academic exercise for him. Dr. King knew that for a movement to actually work, it needed more than just righteous anger. It needed a system. It needed a message so morally clear it couldn't be argued with, and a strategy so disciplined that it could be carried out by thousands of ordinary people under immense pressure. He had to systematize his philosophy to force a nation that prided itself on freedom and justice, to finally look in the mirror and confront its deepest moral contradiction.
And that brings us to the equation itself. Dr. King developed this clear, deliberate, three-part formula for justice. You can think of it as the operating system that powered the entire civil rights movement.
The entire equation, everything, is built on this one foundational belief, a quote he actually adopted from the abolitionist Theodore Parker. He believed that justice was inevitable, but that it needed our help to bend that arc. He saw social protest not as some chaotic riot, but as a disciplined, systematic, almost theatrical performance designed for one single purpose: maximum moral exposure. Every march, every sit-in was a carefully staged scene in a grand play, designed to reveal the truth to the nation and the world, right on their television screens.
So, what are the variables in this equation? Well, they break down into three core principles that worked in perfect harmony: the nonviolent discipline mandate, the moral synthesis rule, and the tension creation protocol. So let's break down what each of these really means. Okay, the first principle is the one everyone knows, but it's often the most misunderstood. The nonviolent discipline mandate was an absolute ironclad commitment, but this was not passive. It wasn't about simply refusing to fight back. It was an active, strategic, and moral weapon. The whole goal was to disarm the opponent morally. I mean, when police responded to peaceful protesters with fire hoses and dogs, that visual contrast was so stark, so indefensible, that it exposed the raw injustice of the system to the entire world. Nonviolence was both their shield and their sword.
All right, the second principle is where Dr. King's genius as a communicator just shines. The moral synthesis rule was his strategy of fusing different belief systems into one unshakable argument. He'd quote the Declaration of Independence and the Bible in the same breath. He appealed to America's founding democratic principles, its core Christian values, and universal philosophical truths. By doing this, he wasn't positioning himself as some outsider criticizing the nation. He was an insider appealing to the nation's own highest ideals. He was basically saying, hey, I'm only asking you to be what you already claim to be.
And the final piece of the equation is the tension creation protocol. Dr. King wrote that nonviolent direct action seeks to create a crisis and foster such a tension that a community that has refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. The goal wasn't chaos. It was about creating constructive tension. A sit-in at a lunch counter creates a tension that makes the injustice impossible to ignore. A march across a bridge creates a tension that forces a choice. It creates a crisis that can no longer be swept under the rug, forcing the hidden, ugly reality of segregation out into the open for everyone to see. Okay, so we have the philosophy. But a philosophy is just an idea until you put it into practice, right? The true brilliance of the MLK equation was that it was paired with disciplined, repeatable routines that turned these abstract concepts into concrete, unified action. The work really broke down into two distinct but totally interconnected systems. You had the internal system, that was Dr. King's own personal, meticulous preparation, the solitary work of crafting the words that would move a nation. And then you had the external system, the community work of preparing the movement, making sure every single participant understood and could execute the strategy with absolute discipline. Both were essential. The message had to be perfect, and its delivery by the movement had to be flawless.
Let's zoom in on that internal system for a second. Dr. King was one of the greatest orators in history, and that was no accident. He had a protocol. His speeches were systematically built. He used this rhythmic, almost musical cadence that just captivated people. He masterfully wove in these recurring biblical and historical references that resonated so deeply with his listeners. He built his speeches like a composer builds a symphony, with rising crescendos and powerful refrains, all of it designed to achieve just unparalleled moral authority and emotional connection.
So, when this equation, this incredible fusion of deep philosophy and disciplined action, was unleashed, the results were, well, they were nothing short of world-changing. The impact was profound, it was rapid, and it was permanent.
Just think back to that 26-year-old in Montgomery. Through the systematic application of this equation, a quiet theologian was transformed into a global moral figure. His personal journey completely mirrored the transformation of the nation itself. He held a mirror up to America, and in forcing it to look, he became the conscience of a generation, a symbol of justice recognized all over the planet.
This timeline just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly illustrates the kind of momentum that moral force can generate. In just 10 years, a decade, the movement went from a local bus boycott to fundamentally rewriting the laws of the United States. The March on Washington in '63 was this pivotal moment of moral theater, and it led directly to the landmark Civil Rights Act of '64, which outlawed discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of '65, which secured the right to vote. These weren't just political wins. They were the direct result of a sustained, strategic, nonviolent campaign.
And his legacy extends far beyond America's borders. The MLK Equation provided a blueprint. It basically institutionalized nonviolent resistance as a powerful and viable tool for social justice movements everywhere. From the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa to the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, you can see the echoes of Dr. King's strategy in the fight for freedom all over the globe. He proved that a moral argument, when systematically applied, could be the most powerful force on earth.
So, what does this all mean for us? Right here, right now. What is the core actionable lesson from Dr. King's life and his work? Well, it all comes down to one fundamental truth about the nature of power.
Let's just pause on this question for a second. How do you change a world that will not listen? How do you fight a system that holds all the physical power, all the institutional authority? It's a question people have been asking for centuries, and it's one we are definitely still asking today. Dr. King's life provides a powerful answer.
Here's the path he laid out for us. First, you don't attack the system with its own weapons. You force the system to expose its own moral flaws for everyone to see. Second, you ground your message not in what divides you, but in the highest shared ideals of your audience. You appeal to their better angels. And finally, you find and you occupy the moral high ground, because that is a territory that is stronger than any army and more powerful than any law.
You know, when you look back, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. built his legacy on the profound truth that the highest form of power is moral courage. The MLK Equation provided a systematic blueprint to change the world with a single voice through disciplined nonviolence and rhetorical mastery. And it's a timeless lesson that in the relentless pursuit of justice, there is one immutable rule: moral conviction is the ultimate superpower.